communism, right? They don't look at themselves as a dictatorship, though, right? We would say, oh, they're totalitarian dictatorship. They don't see that as a reality, a negative reality. It's important to keep right. Neither side sees themselves as what? Yeah, right. They're not the bad guy, right? Yeah, always the other guy's the bad guy. It's important to remember that, right? Although the Germans would have had a problem, right? When you dress up in a black uniform every day, which might have had some adjustment to that. Everybody wears kind of something greenish or brownish. Earth tones never look evil, do they? Bad guys always wear black. So, and then it's also a matter of that ubiquitous symbol that means nothing to you at the present, thankfully. What is that? It's a mushroom cloud, right? The idea of nuclear warfare. You guys don't think about that. When I was your age, that was a big deal. All the time, people talked about stuff like that. Nuclear Armageddon. Remember I was talking about there was that assumption that there was a giant red button. Somebody was pushing it somewhere, and everything was going to blow up. There's a notion. So it's a battle of ideologies, primarily about how people would live. The assumption being that would be driven primarily by what people live. What would be the primary ideological driver? If it's a war between communism and capitalism. The drivers are. Well, they live in fear of nuclear warfare, right? Ideally, you wouldn't live in fear of your own system, although it only seems to work in one place. Although in the 62, right, there's still a lot of imperial possessions in the world. So there are people who live under capitalist states who do live in fear, right? Right? Like where? 62. There are people who live under a pseudo-imperialist state.
Vietnam.
Yeah, Vietnam, right? Matter of fact, if you start talking about 62, there's 2 Vietnams, right? Neither state is a happy place. North Vietnam is under a communist dictatorship, and South Vietnam is essentially under this is a good question, right? What do you call something that's pro-Western, kind of capitalist, but not democratic? It is confusing, right? So it's a pro-Western, essentially a dictatorship. He's not really elected. And matter of fact, the leader there won't be very popular for very long, and he'll end up falling down the stairs while he's carrying all the steak knives, right? And so he gets killed. And so that's the problem. Anyway, let's get going. So, critical questions to ask: when and what was the Cuban Missile Crisis? Who were the critical leaders? What was the reality of? Remember what BMs are? Medium range, right? Medium range and intermediate range missiles, right? What did happen? And why did it turn out as it did? Did somebody win? Right? Somebody went, I don't know. Let's think about it, right? Ideally, we could say if there was no nuclear war, everyone wins, right? So that's happy. This is a happy outcome, perhaps, right? So, main protagonists for the United States, there's JFK, right? And for the Soviet Union, there's Nikita Khrushchev, right? Did they get along? Are they buddies? No, they're not, right? They're not. Think about how they might look at Khrushchev. Starts off life as a peasant, right? I mean, his parents are poor peasants. And so it's through the Soviet system and through him being relatively ruthless, but also relatively competent, that he's able to go all the way from being a poor peasant to being head of the Soviet Union, right? It's like Abraham Lincoln for communism. And so he goes from nothing to everything. It's a big deal, right? And he looks at this guy. And JFK started out as a poor peasant, right? In West Virginia, working in a coal mine. Really? You don't know who John F. Kennedy is? You never heard of the Kennedys? Is he poor? No. Khrushchev looks at him as a spoiled playboy. Like, you're a schmo. You represent everything that's wrong with your system. And so they both have this interesting. Also, Kennedy thinks of himself as being very pragmatic. Let's make a deal. Khrushchev, remember, it's a great phrase. It's in your textbook. Khrushchev is a romantic communist. He really believes in it. He really thinks it works. What do you do? So you have to remember, not that these guys aren't all playing. Some of them really believe what they're doing. He really seems to believe. I think Kennedy believes in capitalism as well. So that you have people who are attached to the system. They're not just playing politics with each other. That comes in. But keep that in mind. Otherwise, when you deal with people and you deal with everybody in a cynical way, then you miss out what might be motivating. Does that make sense? Right? We tend to be cynical about people, right? It's like, what do you really want? As opposed to, what do you believe? Because do you believe in anything? Is there anything you really believe in? You won't admit it, if you do. Would you? Do you really believe in something? Ideally, if you believed in religion, you'd confess it. But nobody will do that either. Do you believe in an idea? No? Like, you believe in capitalism or democracy or donuts or something? Or, no? So you think everyone's cynical then, right? When you interact with people, you assume they're only doing what's best for themselves?
Right.
Oh, unhappy? Okay, let's work on that. So then we have the other two. We have the other two in their relationship, right? Again, this is again Khrushchev, right? And he likes Castro. It's a happy picture, isn't it? A big hug. Remember, Castro had. Who had tried to eliminate Castro in Cuba? The United States, right? The United States had tried to. Matter of fact, they did. That's what the Bay of Pigs is. It's a failed what of Cuba? Invasion, right? They return exiles. There's all that stuff going on. And so the fact is that as they return, they try to get back, try to get him out. Why? Why get rid of Castro? Why get rid of Castro? Just because he has too much of a beard or something? He gives 6-hour speeches.
He and Western, like American businesses, like stop American businesses from operating in Cuba.
Yeah, so he's nationalizing things in Cuba, and he looks more and more like he might be a what? A communist. It's not clear that he really is, but what happens is if he needs a what to protect him from the Americans, so they want him to go. Well, it isn't necessarily. Don't jump ahead. Don't pre-assume the future, right? Because we know it. But he needs a what?
Ally.
He needs an ally, right? And who would necessarily protect somebody who's at least socialist, if not communist? Soviet Union. Remember the Soviet Union? Right now, we're coming into the 60s. The Soviet Union has a competitor as the promoter of Marxism in the greater world. We'll come to that in a minute. And so Castro then, and these two are, so he's the old romantic revolutionary, right? Fought in World War II against the bourgeois imperialist forces of Nazism and capitalism. And this guy now is the new romantic, modern, third world romantic revolutionary. So there, right? It's kind of like the father figure to the young revolutionary, right? So they can see something. Castro will be invited to the Soviet Union. They did really well together. Oh, remember when they become allies, it's not like, psst, you're my ally, I'm going to put nuclear weapons. You know what I mean? That's not assumed yet, but it's a plan. And then two other leaders. This guy never gets any historical play, which is a real crime. We recognize this guy, although this is his thinner phase. And unfortunately, Mao always gets represented as kind of chubby Grandpa Mao. This is actually a lean revolutionary Mao. Mao Zedong, right? Why would I put him up there? Why is he important, do you think? Take a shot. Go ahead, Michelle.
Isn't China allies with the Soviet Union at this point?
By 1962, the Soviet Union and China are falling out.
Oh.
They don't have that. And what would China see itself as a leader of? Maybe as under Mao.
Communism?
Yeah, the communist world, right? And so the Soviet Union sees itself as a leader of the communist world. Mao Zedong could recognize somebody as a leader of the communist world. There's somebody that Mao could say, okay, he's first. Who would that have been? Stalin, right? But Stalin's now dead. And Khrushchev has done what to Stalin's legacy? Destroyed it. He's like, look, remember, Stalin's a criminal. Mao's like, what are you talking about? He's a genius. And so the two of them have parted, Mao and Khrushchev, right? Part ways. But they're also, not only is he a Marxist, he's also from where? Mao Zedong's from where? China, right? And if he's from China, not only are you a Marxist, you also have to remember, he's the guy who liberated China from, kind of helped to liberate from the Japanese, but he's also defeated who? The nationalists, right? So he might also be hot about what? Not just about promoting Marxism, but promoting, what would be the other thing that would tie somebody in? Mao would be interested in where, too? He's the leader of where? China. If he's the leader of China, he might also be interested in the power and the strength of China. So we get to mix Marxism with
China.
What do we call that? You really like your country.
Nationalism.
Well, patriotism is the word we use, but there's a better word.
Nationalism.
Nationalism. So Marxism and nationalism, and oh, by the way, I'm the real communist leader. I'm the one with all the great ideas. Add another element. I am I'm the great brain of communism. What? Which they?
Ego.
Ego. Yeah, ego, right? So ego. That's right, Marco. And so the fact is that so you have Marxism, nationalism, and ego, which means with Khrushchev you potentially have Marxism, Russian nationalism,
Ego.
and ego. And with Kennedy you'll have, so we'll change the word. We won't use nationalism for Americans, we'll say patriotism. A commitment to capitalism and ego. Now for Castro, you have Marxism, nationalism, right? Cuba. And of course, ego. So, do you understand? So all these are playing against each other. Plus, Kennedy has to do something else that none of the rest of them have to do. Kennedy has to answer to somebody.
The rest of the population.
He's what? You're right.
Democratic.
He's a democratic place, so he has to answer to whom?
Average people.
People.
Yeah, the voting population. He also has to worry about something else that helps him lead, to get things done.
Congress.
Very good, Congress, right? This happens in October, and in November, what do we usually have in November? Elections. If he screws up this, that when he's not standing for office, but when the Democrats stand for the Congress, if he screws it up and he's a Democrat, who might lose Congress?
Democrats.
So he's got to worry about that too. So, does this all sound very complicated? Good, because it is. Oh, I'm sorry. He's the head of youth out. Am I saying that right? No, I think he's Cambodian. Okay, well, you might have a better chance than I would. And so he's the head of the UN. He's actually probably the best head of the UN, in my opinion, of the whole of the UN's existence. He does a brilliant job of trying to balance things out. Right? Because that's what the UN's supposed to do. It's supposed to, right, bring people together so they talk and don't fight. This is actually a great success for them. The UN's usually seen as being pretty failish. So we know that Soviets decide at a point that they can come up with a great plan, which is to put nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles in. Why? Why is it a great idea? Why does that seem like a great idea? Why is it changed?
It gives them a better opportunity to attack the U.S.
Potentially gives them a better opportunity to attack the United States. Why?
It's closer.
It's closer. And why not just use ICBMs, right? Intercontinental?
Because this uses a lot less resources.
Well, you're on the right track.
They're not as accurate. 'Cause they're
Who's
not as-
Say it.
Oh, they're not as accurate because I mean you're going across the world. You're traveling such a far distance, so like.
Throwing something a shorter distance is probably more accurate, right? You're right. Something worse about Soviet ICBMs. They only have a few of them, and you think their technology is as good as the United States? Turns out the generic answer to that question about Soviet technology is no. Never. And so the fact is that they're actually pretty good with medium range and intermediate range missiles, and they're really bad with ICBMs. It turns out it's much harder to hit a target on the other side of the planet than to hit the sky. Right? Remember they launched Sputnik and they hit space pretty well? But hitting something like Chicago is actually really complicated. You have to get out the slide rule, right, and do the whole kind of thing on paper. Think about that. They would have had to figure that out with that. Right? They would have been like, the project thing, you turn on the inside, you do the computations, you move a slide rule. You know what I'm talking about, a slide rule? They would have had that. Have you ever seen Apollo 7? Isn't it Apollo, what's it, Apollo 13? What's the one where they go to the moon? Apollo 13? It's a great movie, you should really see it. Because they have to like make stuff up and they have to figure a lot of things out. Like, in a slide rule, right? It's just amazing to me that they could do that. Because we're like, well, my TI 10,000 is not what you do. And so the missiles are there. Why else would you put missiles there? So it would allow you to strike the United States faster? But that may be provocative, right? You make the Americans freak out? What else, Francis?
Well, wasn't the main purpose to protect Cuba in case the U.S. invaded again, like they did the Bay of Pigs?
Okay, there you go. So there could also be more than one reason. Actually, this turns out to be that kind of like D, all of the above. That's exactly. Because what would keep the Americans from attacking Cuba likely, right? If you attack Cuba, you're going to cause a what? Nuclear war. It's no longer
Cold.
right. It's no longer cold. It's very hot, but it's not worth it. Is it really worth